What is going on, everyone? And welcome back, or welcome for the first time, to Philly Frenzy Podcast. And I am your host, Matt. And today we are talking about the head coach vacancy in Philadelphia. I personally want Brian Daboll or Eric Bieniemy. If it is not Brian Daboll or Eric Bieniemy, there's Josh McDaniels, and there's also Joe Brady. But there's two names not being talked about that I'm very interested in if I was the Eagles front office. One of them is Lovie Smith. Lovie Smith is a defensive-minded head coach. Lovie Smith gets the best out of his players. And Lovie Smith was done wrong by Chicago in his past job. The other is another head coach who was done wrong by his organization, who is a defensive-minded head coach, who in my eyes has a very bright future if he decides to come back as a coach one day in the NFL, and that is Marvin Lewis. Cincinnati did not do anything to help Marvin Lewis. And instead of giving him help, they fired him. Marvin Lewis or Lovie Smith are two candidates that are not being talked about that should be ranked higher than McDaniels, that should be higher than Joe Brady, that should be higher than Eric Bieniemy, that should be higher than Brian Daboll. But they're not. The only other person I can think of that I would like to have run the Philadelphia Eagles is Deuce Staley. And if I am Deuce Staley and I get this head coaching job in Philadelphia, I am marching down the stairs or up the stairs, sitting down with Howie Roseman, sitting down with Jeffrey Lurie, and telling both of them, you get me Lovie Smith or Marvin Lewis as my defensive coordinator. Because if you can't get the two of them as a head coach, then why not reach out and try to get one of the two as a defensive coordinator? The other name, which I don't see happening because he's not going to leave the booth, because he has a very good contract extension with CBS, is Tony Romo. Tony Romo may be one of the only guys who could fix Carson Wentz right now. Bieniemy and Daboll may be able to. Seeing what they did with Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. But I don't think they could do what a former NFL quarterback like Tony Romo can do. And not only that, Tony Romo knows what he's talking about 99% of the time. And I think Tony Romo is eventually going to make a very good head coach if he puts his name in the ring at any time in his lifetime. But back to Deuce. You give me Marvin Lewis, or you give me Lovie Smith. Now, if you call both of them and they're both not interested, that's fine. You reached out, you tried. But for you not to try, when two of the best guys are out there that are defensive-minded coaches that you never know might be itching to get back in the NFL, bring them in and they're defensive coordinators, and one day they're head coaches again. You're not doing yourself justice by not making these phone calls. Picking players or picking coaches that you feel are going to be yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, isn't going to make for a foundation for a championship team. Doug Peterson is out the door. And Doug Peterson's out the door because he's not a yes sir anymore. It's not that Doug Peterson can't coach. Now, we could all question what he was doing this year, but Doug Peterson is not a bad coach. He had an off year. Howie Roseman looked for a scapegoat. Howie Roseman got a scapegoat. Howie Roseman, by far, is the worst GM in the NFL. Cannot run an organization. And he continues to get out from underneath of any trouble by firing coordinators and coaches any chance he gets. To hear that John Dorsey is sitting upstairs in that draft room, and John Dorsey doesn't have say on who the Eagles draft, and we can't find a receiver who could catch the ball, who is physical, makes no sense. John Dorsey had his hands in the organization at Kansas City when they built that team with Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill. But you're telling me John Dorsey's sitting upstairs and you can't ask him why you took Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson? But it's Doug's fault. That's why, in a way, it does not matter who Philadelphia signs as their head coach this offseason, because as long as Howie is continuing to call shots, this team is doomed. If you're thinking about saving Carson Wentz and you don't want to trade him, you get a head coach in here who's going to grab Carson Wentz and tell him, this is what you need to get worked on. This is what needs to get done. And if you don't want to do it, you're out the door. Guess what? Same thing goes for Jalen Hurts, because he was not impressive in 4 games. You get your act together or you get shipped out. This whole, we want to try to fix Carson. We want to try to fix Carson. That's great, Jeffrey Lurie. You want to fix Carson because you're paying him so much money. But you can't fix Carson if your head coach looks like he's lost because he doesn't know what upstairs is doing. And he's struggling because he's got nobody to call offensive plays for. And then you want to sit here and blame Carson Wentz for having such a bad year. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to sit here and say Carson Wentz didn't have a bad year. Carson Wentz could not read defense to save his life. But when you got receivers who cannot create separation, you got an offensive line twitching every single week. There is no way you expect anybody to march out there and be as good as Deshaun Watson. Be as good as Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Tom Brady, Drew Brees. It just doesn't happen. You got to spend money to make money. And if you're not going to spend the money, you're not going to make the money. And guess what? You're going to be at the bottom of the barrel looking like Cleveland, waiting 20 some odd years to get back into the NFL playoffs. And be what? A franchise that isn't worth anything? If that's the case, Jeffrey Lurie, sell the team right now and get out. But that's all off topic. This is strictly about the coaches this week. You hire Deuce. You give him say on his coordinators. You don't hire Deuce. You don't pull the trigger because you want this young guy who thinks he knows what he's doing in Joe Brady. Because Joe Brady hadn't shown anything in Carolina last season. He's 30 years old. He's going to be younger than... Was it? No. There's only going to be 6 guys on the Eagles roster that are older than Brady. And you have to hope that these guys respect him. Turn around, Josh McDaniels. You're not going to get Josh McDaniels. If anything, you're going to get McDaniels to agree to a deal, and then he's going to back out at the last second like he's done before. Okay, now let's go to Bieniemy. How good is Bieniemy? He's running an offensive scheme built by Andy Reid, who is calling his own plays. You're there holding a clipboard. In my eyes, I think Bieniemy is a good candidate. But the issue is, what exactly is Bieniemy? Let's go to the ball. Brian Daboll has done a hell of a job in Buffalo. There is no questioning that. That team has turned around very quickly. But how much success does Daboll get given to him for Josh Allen's progression when you find out Josh Allen has been working with Jordan Palmer in the offseason? who is a quarterback guru, who Carson Wentz should get the phone number for and call. But not what we're talking about. You need to draft a guy who is going to come in here and demand respect right away. You need a guy who has experience, who knows what he's doing. Hence why I like Lovie Smith. Why I like Marvin Lewis. These two guys are going to come in and they're going to command the room. They're defensive minded. Give them a strong offensive coordinator. Guess what? You don't like it, Carson? You're out the door. And Marvin Lewis and Lovie Smith aren't going to hold your hand and say, oh, it's okay, Carson. No big deal. You'll get him next week. And if you're scared that they're going to come in here and they're going to rip apart your franchise because these guys aren't men, that they need to be babied, then it's time that you rip apart this 53-man roster and you start getting guys in here who want to play, who have heart, that can take criticism and get better week by week. The struggling is enough. You don't go from a Super Bowl team down to making the playoffs, getting to the second round, Alshon drops the ball, to the next year, making the playoffs, Carson Wentz gets taken out with a concussion, you get first rounded by Seattle, and then this year, you go 4-11-1. Doug Peterson already has been interviewed by the Seattle Seahawks for the offensive coordinator position. Do you really think Doug Peterson is the issue? Because other teams don't. Other teams see exactly what I see. You give him nothing and expect him to make a flower grow. Where's the water? You passed up on receivers. You passed up on offensive linemen. You passed up on good defensive players. For Jalen Reagor. For J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. For Jalen Hurts. When you had a franchise quarterback. And if you were questioning your franchise quarterback, why draft Jalen Hurts in the second round? Doesn't make sense. You go get a veteran. Something happens. Okay, Carson, slide to the left. Insert veteran. But you go and you waste a second round draft pick when there's holes on this team. On a quarterback. It will never matter who the head coach is in Philadelphia, as long as Howie Roseman has power and say in everybody he drafts to this organization, because he does not know what he is doing. He is a money man who has built a $60 million cap hole by signing Alshon, by signing Deshaun, by signing Malik Jackson, by signing Hargrove, by extending Lane Johnson at 30 years old. To a huge contract. Not a contract, a huge one. By giving Carson his contract extension when you weren't even sure if Carson was your man because you drafted Jalen Hurts in the second round. Howie Roseman, hear me out. Lovie Smith and Marvin Lewis are your two top head coaching candidates. Make the call. I hope everyone has a good day and a good night. And thank you for coming out and listening to my show.